Welcome to all of you who are joining us today. A very warm good evening to those who are in India and a good afternoon to those who are in Israel. My name is Manoj Keval-Ramani. I head the Indo-Pacific Studies program and the China research work at the Takshashila institution. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of Takshashila and the Abba Eban Institute for International Diplomacy to this second event in a series that we've titled High-Tech Geopolitics Perspectives from India and Israel. The objective of these discussions is to not just understand each other's view on emerging technologies, but also identify pathways to unlock the potential for India-Israel cooperation with regard to innovation and emerging technologies. We've always spoken about how there is great potential and we want to identify at least a few tangible areas in which cooperation is already taking place or in which it can be intensified through governments and through corporations that are working in both countries. Before we begin to sort of talk a little bit more about that, let me just take a minute to introduce our two institutions. The Takshashila Institution is an independent center for research and education in public policy. We are an independent, non-partisan think tank, and we are concerned with how India shapes the world and how the world shapes India in turn. We are also focused on transforming how India is governed and exploring the intersection of technology, economics, and politics. Our partners, the Abba Eban Institute, is a proactive research center, a do tank, if you will, dedicated to the advancement of innovative diplomacy in Israel and beyond. Focused on action-oriented practices and multi-sector approaches, it has been shaping the future of diplomacy and Israel's global standing. And we're really thrilled to have this partnership with them to do these sessions every month, focusing on different topics. Today's theme, of course, is the India-Israel relationship and the 5G conundrum. I want to take a moment to talk about why we titled this as a conundrum. And it's because there are several difficult policy choices that governments and corporations around the world have to make as we usher in the next generation of this telecom revolution. These relate to a completely new round of capital investment that is required, intense new research and development, new sets of standards that need to be set, and of course, the geopolitics around 5G that we've seen play out over the last few years. And the fact that at the heart of it, this is a change in technology that will revolutionize the nature of applications that we will see and also create new business models and new opportunities. So to discuss all of this, we have with us a stellar panel. First, it's a pleasure to host Mr. Jonathan Zadka. He is the Consul General of Israel in Bangalore with consular jurisdiction over the states of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and the Union Territory of Puducherry. Mr. Zadka is a career diplomat. His previous posting was in Beijing, where he acted as Minister and Deputy Chief of Mission. So I'm sure he's going to bring to us an interesting perspective on how Israel's 5G policy has developed, and also a sense of what are the security challenges that countries are thinking about. We also have Dr. Satish Ananthayyar. He has over 2 decades of experience in the telecom sector, having worked in research and product development, management and marketing, along with running a successful startup in the telecom space. He is currently Vice President Engineering at Cellular, where he's responsible for the 5G RAN product. So I'm going to be making sure that we pick his brain about the specific areas of technology that a lot of us talk about without really even understanding them. Joining them is Mr. Guy Machlev. He too has around 2 decades of experience in this space. For much of the last decade, Mr. Machlev has been engaged at Nokia, where he currently serves as Senior Director R&D and Head of Nokia's cloud infrastructure software in Israel. Mr. Machlev works regularly with Indian entities too, and we were just talking to him prior to going live about the team that he has in India that he works with, and it's quite an impressive number of people, and I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit more about that. And we're really happy to have him here to talk to us about all of this. Last but not the least, we have Mr. KPM Das, who is currently serving as the National Cybersecurity and Trust Officer for India and ASEAN at Cisco. He has previously served in the Indian Army, and we look forward to his thoughts on India's strategic interests and security challenges when it comes to 5G, because that's been one of the big issues of debate in India over the last couple of years, ever since the whole issue around Huawei sort of became a big deal. Before I head to the panelists for their opening remarks, I have a request for all our attendees. Your cooperation and participation is essential to the success of the discussion. Therefore, I'd like to request you to keep your microphones on mute at all times. If you'd like to ask a question, please post it in the chat box, and I'll come to you in due time with the commitment that I'll try to address as many questions or comments as we can in the time that we have. You can, of course, choose to keep your cameras off or on, depending on your preference. But yeah, just your participation and your cooperation in this process will be really, really essential to making all this go very smoothly. With that said, I'd like to begin with Mr. Zadka. I would like to turn to him for his opening remarks. And I'd like to request him to focus his comments on 5G development in Israel and his views on the potential areas in which India and Israel can particularly look to deepen engagement. Mr. Zadka.
So good evening, good afternoon, shalom, namaste everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this series of panels. Thank you, Manoj, for the kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here today. Like you said, this is a very broad subject, that we're discussing here today, and as part of this a number of panels in technology in regards to the Israel-India relationship. With your permission, I would share some of my observations from my short stay in India, and I would like basically to focus on a few elements that would relate to Israel-India cooperation, and given that this is a very technology-oriented topic, to focus and to put some emphasis on South India and especially Bangalore. The key issue I thought is relevant and is greatly affected or even generated by 5G implementation is the shift from device manufacturing based economy to application based models, and this is an issue that has great influence both on Israel and India and on the growing collaboration, especially when it comes to 5G related infrastructure and so on. As 5G infrastructure is to become more available, I think global connectivity integration would become crucial for such implementation. Application-based models become as important, if not more important than device manufacturing economic growth engines. In this scenario, Israel, as a private economy, expert-oriented, technology-rich economy, and India, again, looking at Bangalore as a technological hub, are very well positioned. A fact that only makes the potential cooperation between Israel and India even greater than it is right now. I don't want to repeat what was said in the last panel, which very much drilled into the existing cooperation, the very broad cooperation between Israel and India, and I would like to use it as a benchmark in order to move forward. But and again, I know I'm not representing India here today, but it is important, at least for me, to set the venue from the way that it's perceived from the Israeli side. And just to give some sense, again, using Bangalore as an example, I know that this does not represent India, but definitely it does represent the focal or focus of, let's say, technology-oriented cooperation from Israel with India. It is a unique ecosystem. I think Nitin Pai said last time that it's, first of all, you need to consider that it's 2,000 kilometers away from Delhi, and that is important physically and mentally. Home to over 50% of India's tech startups. It's a playing field to a great number of VCs, international and domestic, and for the same I can say for unicorns. Aside from having a lot of manufacturing done, very much related to 5G, AI, autonomous vehicles, aerospace, all using Bangalore as a hub. It is also a very much the capital of application-based giants services, especially in India and maybe worldwide. Companies like Flipkart, Swiggy, Big Basket are all originated from the Bangalore ecosystem, and others that not necessarily have been born in Karnataka or Bangalore have shifted their headquarters to Bangalore just to make sure that they're able to tap into this ecosystem. And not to mention, of course, service-oriented giants like Infosys, Wipro, very much, and I'm focusing on Bangalore because these attributes very much relate also to Israel. Again, if you put aside scale and scope, the same attributes that would support Indian or technology-based economy, application-based, is very much true to the ecosystem in Israel. In many ways, Israel and India are global capability centers when it comes to these applications. And for the future, I think the physical presence, the geographical presence, the manufacturing presence is becoming less and less important, and then the application-based models are becoming much more evident and important, and are sustainable for such collaboration. Again, putting aside scale and scope, comparison between Israel and India is always confusing. Both Israel and India enjoy elements that, structural elements that explain at least the potential for that. If it's education and talent centers, English engineering education programs, open internet, open platforms, and I think the most important one is fully integrated, that they're both fully integrated into the global app economy. And this is something that you cannot necessarily say that to every relevant country or player when it comes to the growing 5G, let's say, models. Still, just to put it in perspective, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think part of what you're doing in this series between Takshashila and Abba Even Institute generates this awareness, this relevance, because Israel needs to make sure that it generates awareness within the relevant Indian investors, startup community, the basic technological, let's say, ecosystem, and also that it shows relevance to its needs and desires in the way that it complements them. Again, taking back to the point that we always need to understand the massive difference in scale and scope. At the moment, a lot is being done in order to engage when it comes to deep tech in many fields. And I think that's basically the demand, if I would say, from our Indian counterparts. A lot of them would want to see more cooperation happening between India and Israel when it comes to deep tech. These has to be elements that they could be attributed to agri-tech, they could attribute to medicine, to life sciences, to water management, but these are not the simple ongoing collaboration or technological transfer. The desire is to have a deep engagement, especially when it comes to deep tech. And I think as close as we get to application based on 5G platforms, these exactly these desires would become greater and greater, and hence the potential. I think that would be my general remarks, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those comments. And yes, it is indeed interesting that there are different areas in which we can cooperate, like you've identified, and there are also similarities in how we approach things. From app-based models is one thing that we can sort of do a lot on, and obviously talent, technological skills, the nature of the internet in both the countries is something, and also how integrated we are in the global app economy. Those are actually very interesting points to look at. I want to now turn to Dr. Anant Iyer to talk to us about the state of 5G development in India. In many ways, we've gone slow on this, and that has to do with a lot of other requirements with regard to capital and the rest of it. But I want to sort of understand what the private sector is doing in India. How can governments across the country aid 5G development? And of course, what are the specific areas in which Indian firms can collaborate with Israeli partners? So Dr. Anant Iyer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Manoj. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Shalom, namaste. So thank you for providing an interesting opportunity for me to actually speak about the status of 5G development in India. Quickly, 5G is the quote unquote next gen radio access technology that enables gigabit speed data. And like Jonathan was saying, enables a host of interesting applications. Other than high speed data, digital voice, we can do digital video, AR, VR, industrial IoT, smart city, and digital health. This technology can be deployed in a sub 6 gigahertz or a millimeter wave band. And as opposed to 4G, which only needs 10 to 20 megahertz of bandwidth, 5G needs actually increased bandwidth, like 80 to 100 megahertz. And the key there is spectrum allocation. Like Manoj was saying, India is a little bit slow in this regard, mainly because the current 4G deployments are being monetized. And there have been talks of spectrum auction, mainly in the area of 3.3 to 3.6 gigahertz. But things are actually slowly moving. But in the meanwhile, there's a lot of work done within the ecosystem, and I'll briefly touch upon that. Currently, the Indian operators actually have demonstrated 5G solutions in the 1.8 gigahertz band, which is typically where 4G is deployed. But like I said earlier, I think the government has to open up the airwaves. Now, with regard to the private sector initiatives, right? Traditionally, telco equipments have always been outsourced in India, like 3G, 4G, like Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, ZTE, Cisco, Samsung, right? These are guys who are actually kind of bringing in the gear and really running the networks too. But now, thanks to the government's initiative for a digital India, we have many initiatives, Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. It's prompted more MSMEs, given impetus for startups to actually get involved in technology development. I myself have done a fair amount of work to kind of really bring 5G into India. More importantly, it also has attracted ID behemoths, right? The TCSs, Infosys, HCLs, to participate really in building 5G network equipment infrastructure, and also really providing end-to-end solution delivery. So the government actually has, pretty much put in a lot of funding, mainly in the form of grants to premier research institutions like IIT and CDOTs, like about 400 million to generate like IPR core technology, which can be leveraged and licensed, for indigenization and build out of the equipment. And just today, this morning, I read that they're actually putting down about, I think, 12,000 crores or $1.7 billion for a production-related incentive scheme that will potentially position India as a global powerhouse for equipment manufacturing. So I think that's really a very important step taken by the government. I think more importantly, the one thing that I've seen happening really well in countries like South Korea is enabling small companies to kind of really deploy private gear and provide 5G services. Basically, it nurtures and develops the ecosystem. And I think Indian government should kind of enable opportunities for small companies. Now, with regard to the, in order to enable this, we should actually do something like an open spectrum policy, like follow US, for example, right? US has actually opened up the CBRS spectrum, which is an unlicensed spectrum. And the airwaves between 3,300 to 3,800 megahertz, pretty much private companies can deploy 5G services, and this is called for 4G it's called private LTE or private 5G. This particular we can actually take this 5G technology and provide high performance, but yet lower capex opex solutions. And at Saluna, we're actually working towards providing this type of solution in starting off with the US. It's a seamless Wi-Fi like solution, which includes cloud-based applications and a very less expensive 5G access points, and that can be managed in a very simple fashion like a Wi-Fi network. And coming to the how we can actually interact with Israel, I mean, it's not a surprise to say that Israel has some of the best technology minds. When I was at Purdue doing my PhD, I have worked with researchers which have provided seminal contributions to the space. And Israel actually has a really great set of telecom startups. I've actually interacted with some of them myself. And I think I would think that right, in view of Sino-Indian tensions, right, the Indian government policy is to kind of really do a a interaction between Israel, US, and India, right, to design an open, reliable, interoperable, and secure communication 5G network. So I think we should probably take that pretty seriously and kind of move forward. For this to gain momentum, I mean, this is my humble suggestion. I think, like we discussed, Tel Aviv, Bangalore, and Silicon Valley, right? They are the kind of innovation hubs in the world, and there are so many startups that are actually kind of working on 5G technologies. For example, we can actually have close cooperation between startups at these three hubs. Perhaps we can actually do a center for excellence focused on really inherently strong areas. India is actually strong in software, manufacturing, application development. Israel can actually bring in a lot of IPR, silicon solutions for 5G and security. US, as usual, can kind of work on promoting standards, silicon and cloud-based applications. So I think the three countries can come together and then leverage the innovation hubs to really provide a global 5G network that can not only be used in these three countries, but all over the world. So that's a quick thought on 5G from my side. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of points covered, and I think we'll talk about some of these as we go ahead. Particularly the idea of how we can link our startups, work on a center for excellence, and also the specific strengths that each side can bring onto bear. No, this is fascinating food for thought that I think we should talk about as we go ahead into the discussion conversation. But before that, I'd like to now come to Mr. Machlev. I'd like to request him to weigh in with regard to, once again, the sort of 5G innovation ecosystem in Israel from a private sector point of view. What is it that makes Israel special, apart from this sort of deep sense of being a society which promotes innovation? But what is it that, from a policy point of view, that makes Israel tick and the innovation ecosystem work? And again, what are the areas in which he sees we can collaborate? In the companies in Israel and India can collaborate, and how can also sort of multinational companies sort of work to build synergies between these two countries? Mr. Machlev?
Yeah, of course. First of all, shalom and namaste, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and it's a real interesting opportunity maybe to share with all of you some of what we're doing here. So I'm actually, I'm representing Nokia. I've been working with Nokia for the last almost 10 years. Like before that, many years at Cisco. So for me, so this collaboration between Israel technology and engineering and India, it's the day-to-day. So I've, before this panels, before start, I was sharing some of the, the day-to-day things that we're doing. So yes, we have teams working together for, on a daily basis, day-to-day. I will get to what exactly we're doing and how this is related to 5G, but maybe a few words about Nokia. And so Nokia, is a global company, more than 100,000 employees. It's have location all over the world. Responsible for not most, but the major part of the worldwide mobile network, of course, in India and in the US and all over, right? So speaking about 5G, it's something that everybody need to understand. So it's deploying 5G network require a huge capex and huge investment. This investment need to pay off. So everybody is looking on, okay, so I did this investment, how I can get this, what is the return of this investment? This is exactly where we are working on, and this is where the innovation come into place. And with this collaboration that happen, again, in a daily basis, at least I run a team today, it's in the area of what's called the monetization and revenue management. So, okay, you invest this huge amount of money on your infrastructure, antennas, right, and cell sites, and it's huge. Okay, so what I need to do something about it, right? So I need to get this somehow this revenue, and this is where exactly where we're focusing on. And so we have a team today of a few hundred people working across the globe. We have a quite big team in Israel, obviously a bigger team in India, actually 2 sites. We have Bangalore and we have Gurgaon, where great minds come together in order to think about how we can monetize and how we can help our customer to keep up, to sustain their business, right? This, it's not a secret that this telecom business is be tough, right? So, I think most of you in this panel probably pay about, I don't know, something like $10 per month for your mobile phone, right, plan. That's not what these giant will be able to sustain, right? They need something else. So this 5G opened the door for 2 new opportunities. So I know this word of application software has been mentioned in before discussion. So this is all about application. So truly 5G, beyond the things that you can see at the streets, right? These antennas, everything else is a software. There's this term that's called mobile edge computing. So it's once this, you cross this radio channel, everything goes to coppers and lines and optics, and everything is being processed as a full data, right? Digital things, right? So and this software is something that these companies like Nokia, Cisco, Ericsson, and everybody else, they're working hard on. Right? So you have, if you think about it today, these antennas that you have all over the place, and it's going to be, even in the 5G, is going to be much more massive. We always have a small piece of software running very close to it. It's even, you can see it as a mini cloud. There's many mini clouds that going all over and being centralized as from one centralized orchestration system. And it allowed the operators, the government, and everybody else to kind of manage it, allow these calls, like a very high speed data interaction. And of course, it's open the opportunity for additional new monetization and revenue streams. And it's like, a few examples could be like called the private mobile network. Right? So you have a factory, it's called the Industry 4.0. It's fully autonomous. You need to provide a full network for this factory. How you can do that? How you can do that in 2 clicks, right? And how you can monetize this, how you can charge for this. So this area is something that we've been working for the last couple of years, jointly with our colleagues in Bangalore and Gurgaon, and of course in Israel, and even in Palestine, right? It's we have a team in Ramallah. So it's amazing to see the way it works and it collaborates. So for me, the day-to-day is starting the early morning with calls with India, moving on with Israel, and then we're going to North America. So it's what's called the follow the sun is practically my way of living. So it's truly nice things. So this is from my side, and be happy maybe later on to get some questions. And
Sure, certainly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I finally want to turn to Mr. KPM Das. I'd like him to provide us with an Indian perspective on the geopolitics of 5G and how the Indian government has been approaching, and therefore also how companies have been looking at the balance between security and economic interests. And in this context, what sort of collaboration is possible with partners in Israel? Mr. Das?
Thank you, Manoj, for this opportunity, and it was great hearing the earlier speakers. I have the benefit of hindsight and picking up a few things from there. But if you look at security and economy as 2 facets of a conundrum like this, 20, 30 years back, it would have been economy which would have led the conversation, right? Things are completely different, especially in the subcontinent. All of us are aware of what's happening. And the government, like many other governments, have taken a few steps forward, a few steps back, and we've been seeing there's a lot of tentative approach to induction of 5G, right? So, before you start from India, you need to look at the global scenario. Look at US, right? They have this clean network regulation, very recent, during the Trump regime. Then you have the telecom security bill in UK, who at one time actually was perfectly okay with any OEM coming in and deploying in the 5G. And very lately, they've taken a stance otherwise, more conservative. Australia, of course, I think led the pack. They were the first to actually close their options from a choice of vendor. Brazil took a step forward, then took a step back, and we really don't know what they're going to do. So this is a situation all over the world. India is no different. And we also have the challenge of what we faced during the 2G, 3G, 4G regime. We've had the telecom operators who now consolidated into 3 or maybe 4 if you include BSNL. There is a huge issue of ability to bring capital on the table. And that is a big, big challenge. Someone just mentioned about $10 a month. That's luxury in India. The ARPU, the average revenue per unit in India, is close to $2. So operators are cognizant of that. In fact, we don't even know when spectrum is offered, if there's anyone who's willing to take it, because the history is more recent. And so these are the challenges around economy. On the security, the bigger issue is a lot larger. We are aware of what happened to the entire app ecosystem about 2 months ago, or maybe 6 months ago. And to my mind, it's an irreversible philosophy, right? Given the strong strains of nationalism and Atmanirbhar and all of that. In fact, just before this call, I was on a call with NCAC as part of an industry group. And we have some more barriers which are looming in the Indian market from a security point of view. The telecom minister on the 16th of December announced something called the National Security Directive. Typically, one would expect it to be an all-encompassing security directive, but this one is just focused on telecom, and without having mentioned, it actually is about 5G, which is that there's going to be a definition of something called the trusted source, and then the trusted product, and eventually the trusted component. Now, for companies like Nokia, Ericsson, Cisco, and all others, whose supply chains, is strung across the world, the markets are strung across the world, and where you cannot develop products for the specific market, you need to have a global market. It's a big challenge. So we are expecting some very tall regulation coming up, defined. And by 15th of June, I understand India is going to have a formal trust-based, figure of merit, measure-based qualification. And that's going to be very challenging for people who have global markets and global supply chains. So this is one big issue that we think India will have to deal with. The second is about the nature of 5G itself. And on a very positive note, if you look at 5G, it's largely about services. It's a service-oriented, service-based architecture, decomposed, decentralized. And I think this is an ideal fit for India, which has already got a very strong service base. And there are some intersections with Israel which very prominently stand out. Israel is at the cutting edge of technology. In terms of patents and the number of patents they hold, I think it's incomparable. But much of this needs to be proven in proof of concepts, inside laboratories, inside trials. I think there can't be a more better fertile ground than India itself, where you have both the use cases like smart cities. You also have the talent and the resources to mobilize them. As of today, except for Rakuten, who's deployed in Tokyo, even that is about 2 million, that's about it. There is no major use case as yet where 5G has been deployed in large numbers. So potentially, we qualify for that. And I think this is an area where we need to work very closely with Israel. The other area possibly is, and this is triggered by the choice made by Reliance Jio, to support Open RAN, ORAN. And in that, there's a lot of pieces to be put together. Nothing is out of the box. You need to system integrate. And system integration is something that naturally comes to some of these large enterprises in Israel. So there is a lot of things on the agenda which we could work together. So these are my initial thoughts.
No, fascinating. I think, thank you so much. This sort of gives us sort of impetus to get into a discussion. And I just want to sort of address all the attendees. We're having some sort of a technical issue with our chat box. So in case you have any questions, please just raise your hand and I'll come to you in due time. I want to first ask a very basic question to Mr. Kai Machlev and to Dr. Satish Anantayar. We've been hearing about this distinction that about the core and edge in 5G and how, particularly countries where there is an issue with regard to how the geopolitics of 5G is playing out and issues with regard to trust. We've been hearing about how you can distinguish between the core and the edge, and how, data processing can happen at certain levels and those can be much more secure. So it's so procuring hardware from cost-effective entities, whether those are Chinese entities, is not going to be a huge issue. There's been some back and forth on this. We've seen the UK go back and forth on this particularly. And this has been a conversation in India also. So I wanted to get a sense from the two of you, starting with Mr. Machlev probably, about is this distinction even worth making? Or is there sort of, or is it a futile distinction to make? Because if, at the end of the day, when you're buying hardware from somebody, it will have consequences on your security.
So I think from our experience, hardware these days is much less significant than what it was before. Usually we're talking about very much a commodity type of hardware that you can push and operate everywhere. It could be in the core, it could be at the edge. What makes the difference is the software that runs on top. So this is where we'll have the stacks that take care of the security, the communication, and on top of all is the, of course, the application. So it's all about how to orchestrate both the edge and the core to bring it to a kind of one cloud managed software.
Okay. Dr. Anantayar, could you sort of agree with that?
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with what Guy is saying. I think the focus actually of current day 5G networks is really software centric. In fact, this concept really started back in the days of 4G. The reason it being that, for operators, the CapEx and OpEx of running proprietary boxes from different vendors, basically elements of the network, is actually pretty onerous. And they kind of try to really, put down system design in such a way that, all the networks are kind of software centric, which means that you can run the core, the edge, in fact, pretty much even the RAN actually on software, right? So, and really, it's general purpose hardware, and all these security mechanisms are really algorithms that are written in software, which actually protect the integrity of the network and as well as the user. I mean, there are certain encryption modules, right, which need hardware accelerators, but these are really very specific. But most of the network is kind of driven by software centric applications.
Okay, so we can have those sorts of solutions which can make it easier to at least manage things, right?
Correct.
Okay, I want to sort of just point out for people who want to ask their questions, at the bottom of the Zoom window, you'll have a box called reactions. If you just click on that, you can sort of raise your thumb, give us a thumbs up, but also we can come to you to ask a question if you'd like to. But while we get people doing that, I want to just turn to the panelists for a different sort of question. I want to turn to Jonathan Zadka and ask him about the security concerns in Israel. What are the kinds of thinking? What is the thinking on security concerns given what we are seeing play out?
So we are also a very security-oriented country, and I think when it comes to elements of 5G, there are different sorts of security concerns. The one that would come first to your mind would be about the communication infrastructure, but this is hardly, I think, at the moment a security issue in Israel, especially because existing legislation way back before we even knew what 5G was related to the need for scrutiny in within the mechanism regarding anyone that implements anything relating to IT infrastructure. So in that sense, we have the mechanism on board, and it's working well and has been before in previous generations, and hopefully it would do the same work this time. As for the elements of the application, I think we share the same security concerns as anyone else. I very much relate to what Mr. Das said. I think this is in many ways the same atmosphere, the same element that basically revolves around the system in Israel at the moment.
Okay, that's an interesting point for us to note, that there is at least a congruence and thought on that particular issue with regard to security. I want to I've spoken about security with regard to how states are approaching it and how states are thinking about it, and Mr. Das and Jonathan have both spoken about it. I want to look at what is the implication of what we are seeing between the US and China, and also issues with regard to the rest of the world. How is it impacting corporations? How are corporations adapting to what are clearly challenges? I mean, is it creating new opportunities? Is there a segmentation that will end up with markets being far more divided? What does that do in terms of interoperability between different markets then, if you're going to see the so-called silicon curtain of 5G fall on the world? How are corporations navigating this? And I want to begin with Mr. Das first before I go to the others.
Right. So this is a very timely one, and recent events have actually accelerated, our thoughts in this. One is the good news is that much of this works on standards which are globally accepted. These are fairly well established. So much of the manufacturing, the development, the secure development life cycle, most of it today is based on open standards. They are based on interfaces which are open. And so to that extent, from a technology point of view, global standards actually dictate much of this. The recent challenges are more around specific hardware and supply chains, country of origin, for example, or the place where it's all assembled, where the PCB assembly is happening. Those are challenges which are there. And I think from a business resilience point of view, companies like Cisco for sure, and I know Nokia, for example, and others, they have kind of reduced their risk by spreading their sources across the world. So if something can be built in Mexico, there's also an alternate business resilient option in Malaysia, just to take two countries. So this model of business resiliency, which is already existing, I think should be able to get us through. I'm also hopeful that the two big stakeholders here, US and China, can only pull back from the brink going forward. This is my belief. And we would find ways to actually resolve it without fragmentation of markets.
Mr. Machlev, your thoughts on that? How is Nokia and how are corporations dealing with this challenge?
Again, I'm back to my own business, right? I mentioned this monetization, and we're talking about Israel and India, but actually it was mentioned that Malaysia and China. So actually our organization, our group is global, and we have even the biggest team we have is in Beijing. So we have people working, engineers, like as I said, it's this open standard and this standardization going on, especially in the 4Gs and 3GPP and all these standards, something that dictate the way we are developing our software. So it's really one global software factory. Doesn't matter where is the engineer located. At the end, it's going to one pipeline, and everything is being built like in this world. It's there's the microservices and all this modern way of developing software. But it's not that there's single engineer that is doing one thing and there's no one else that is being reviewed it, and so it's all getting to one big pipeline, which is being reviewed, scanned, and tested. So it could be that the engineer in China is developing something and the other engineer in India is running the test, and then the integration is just being done in Israel. So it's very, very transparent, and every piece of code is being checked and for integrity and security. Again, from the ground level, like in where I see the things that going on, I don't see any issue. It's, of course, it's when you're going up in the chain, it's starting to get more complex. But so really, from in my point of view, in my perspective, things really work well. So
okay. Dr. Anantayir?
Yeah, so I think with regard to 5G, right, overall, I think the standards, the 3GPP standards itself provide a certain level of security and encryption built in. For example, user IMSI encryption is provided where user identity can be secured. So there is a lot of work done in the standards, network protection schemes, secure gateways and things like that. But with regard to the actual development of a product, right? I mean, we are Cellular is a US-based company. It's a startup based out of California, right? And we have a center for excellence in India. We for our LTE solution, we really used industry components and small cell products, which are which come from, for example, Taiwan, right? I mean, and things are okay. For 5G, I think at a technology level, I don't see that there is an issue. But for certain, like for example, defense-related projects, like within the US, right, or perhaps in other countries, maybe there is a restriction with regard to from where you can source your product, and we will have to be compliant to the requirements of those those companies. I mean, that's the way we look at it at this point.
Okay, that's fascinating. So, I mean, essentially, companies are being able to do things that they want to do and do this at a sort of international level with different countries and people working across different countries without much sort of the impact of the sort of changes that we've seen in the last few years has not been as significant on business as one would assume. Yet it probably has created new opportunities because certain markets have, because of government policies, created space for certain companies to capture greater market in certain countries, as opposed to, and also because of the security concerns or at a political level, what concerns may have been for those governments. That's the sort of sense that I'm getting. All right, I'm still awaiting any sort of questions that people may have. And if you can, please just sort of, go to the reactions button and you can raise your hand over there or just give us a thumbs up and I'll come to you. But I wanted to come to Ambassador Ron Prosor, who heads the Abba Eban Institute, for his thoughts on this conversation.
First of all, thank you. It's fascinating to hear this. So I want to take, without being repetitive, I think that, and I know it's a nice thing that we haven't really engaged with the elephant in the room. And what is the elephant in the room? It's not the Indian elephant. It's basically both India and Israel, but let's add the UK and Australia, basically having to deal with this issue also from an American perspective. And you saw, you know, KPM Das also mentioned it, what happened in the UK on moving backwards. So Boris Johnson, with all the amazing haircut that he has, when the US came and said, hey, 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 had to go backwards, Australia. And in the sense, I think that by presenting it this way, we also have to look at the challenges, but I think both Israel and India are on the right side of finding solutions for it, okay? Now, I really listened very carefully to Satish Antaya, who said basically, what's the added value? India has a software, Israel IPR, and the US prompting tenders, okay? And I think it's a very good way to differentiate it, because when I always look at, you know, on how do we get Israel and India to work together on this. So from my point of view, this is where's the added value. And I think we have an added value here, especially under the definition, Das, that you mentioned concerning, you know, the National Security Directive on a trusted source, a trusted product, and automatically then a trusted country. Okay, so this has to work together. Now, I think that, again, because of China, India, allow me to say, from the Israeli perspective, is an amazing counterbalance to China from an American perspective, okay? Because it has all the ingredients that are relevant in democratic countries, and also a US, I think, understanding of the counterbalance of India toward China, especially, you know, in the things that are happening. Israel here, as the basically, we are the small country. We have to try and navigate. It's like a zodiac between two aircraft carriers, okay? So we have to find the way that we can basically promote our IPR and our technology in a way that makes a difference. It's obvious that Israel, on the Israel-Indian parameters, is nowhere in the equipment manufacturing side, obvious, okay, because of size and, but Israel is exactly under the category of maybe small companies that will provide the solutions to what India needs because of the background, because of the trust, and because of the ability to really cooperate and think about those things together. So from my point of view, I really enjoyed it, and in the sense to really put the challenge on us on how to create this cooperation between Israel and India. Guy talked a lot about Nokia. I understand that he has a great role in Nokia, but I'm talking about Israel, okay? And Israel, India, okay? On this issue of where we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there are no other questions or thoughts from the audience, then I would like to sort of pose one final question to all of the panelists. So we've spoken about some really interesting, when I started this conversation, my hope was to be able to identify 2 or 3 at the most tangible areas in which you can actually cooperate and, you know, unlock the potential that we keep talking about. And I think at least in some senses we've had that come out, which is great. You know, some of the ideas about how talent can engage across both countries, how we can actually look to set up centers of excellence, how software and cloud-based security could be one area where we could work together, including use cases and proof of concept in India with the technology sort of innovation that's taking place in Israel. All of these are really, really interesting spaces in which we can work on. And of course, all of this will be underpinned not just by innovative capacity in both countries, but also trust, political trust with regard to where each of us see each other in the world. And that, I think, is really, really critical. With that, I just want to come to sort of final thoughts for all the panelists. Okay, so before final thoughts, I'll just take a question from Pranay. Pranay, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pranay from Takshashila institution, and I had a couple of questions. So first one, I wanted to know from the Israeli side, for example, on the technical standards front, there's a lot of talk in India about Open RAN and option 6, etc. So what is the status in Israel? Is there a movement towards adopting Open RAN as a system for 5G? That is one question. The second one, more on the security side. So we try to analyze what are the types of perspectives countries are taking with respect to Huawei. And we found out like there can be broadly 3 types of arguments. One is an economic argument, which says that, whichever is the cheapest option, why would you let go of it? So that's sort of one argument, and that's why a lot of countries are adopting Huawei as a equipment provider for 5G. The second one is a security first argument, where the frame of reference is primarily national security. And what you're saying is that as long as your security concerns are met, it's not a problem. We can have equipment from any country. The third one is a strategic argument, and that is that how can you handle a nation state's critical communication infrastructure to a geopolitical competitor? And I guess a lot of things with respect to US, Japan, Australia, and even to some extent India fall under the third argument, which is the strategic one. So I wanted to know, what is the perspective of Israeli companies on this? Do they agree on either of these 3 arguments, or there's a fourth perspective way of looking at it? Thanks.
Mr. Machlev, would you like to take a dig at that?
I can try, right? So for the Open RAN, it's something that is being adopted. Again, I'm getting back to Nokia, but that's I cannot represent what the Israeli operator would like to use or not, but definitely something which is being adopted and promoted as well. So again, at the end, that's whatever the operator, the local operator will use is the commercial software and solution that will be provided by any one of these vendors, right? So it's the Ericsson, could be Nokia, and so on. So I don't see any rejection or anything like that on this Open RAN. So it's definitely something which is being adopted. About security, so one of the approach that is being taken and adopted by many operator is a multi-vendor approach. So trying not to get everything from one vendor. So you can get the hardware from one vendor and the software from another vendor and the orchestration for the third vendor. So I do see that very common across and also in Israel. So that's the way for you to get more control on what you're getting. So it's you're not allowing one specific provider vendor to get and control your entire network. So they trying to do this split in the way they building their own network. So that's the way that being managed.
Manoj, I would like to add here the issue, if I may.
Yes, please.
On security, because I think that in today's world, the issue of security and trust moves all the other, and it becomes maybe the #1 priority. Yes, obvious technology, ability, but security, the privacy issue, the fear of interference inside society, into people, the ability to use that information and abuse it becomes something that I think would be paramount in the way it is going to be seen in, and basically I'm looking now at the US from that point of view. And we have to look at the new phrase that I think is going to enter our debates, and that is QTE, Qualitative Technological Edge, where the United States of America is going to come to its allies, India and Israel, Canada, Australia, or the UK, are going to say, hey guys, on whose side are you? Because those are security issues, and you have to think twice before you move on and cooperate with others. So I just wanted to make the point that, to my mind, was going to be very crucial dealing with this.
All right. Mr. Zadka, would you have anything to add to that?
You know, I think it very much relates to earlier comments here. And the idea is that, you know, it's an issue for the operators, like Guy said, and it's also an issue for the regulators in Israel, in which they are able to facilitate the different components of the system. Like I said earlier, this has been regulated for a very long time, and there is no there is no systemic approach of saying, you know, of depriving somebody of access. The issue is very much technical and to the point, and very much relates to the same regulation that comes into effect whenever there is any international component within the system that the operators would eventually implement.
All right, fair enough. Okay, I think we've already run out of time. We're a little bit over time. I wanted to get a few last thoughts, but I think I'll let that be for the moment. We've had an interesting conversation, and I would like to thank everybody for their thoughts and comments. And I'd like to thank all the attendees for you know, being here with us throughout this entire conversation. I hope you found it as enriching and fruitful as I have. Thank you so much to all my panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.